Why did the dog react before the Marine ever looked up? Staff Sergeant Mara Whitlock had learned to trust silence more than noise. Silence had kept her alive on rooftops and inside dust-filled stairwells where breath itself felt like a betrayal. That morning, the silence in the coffee shop felt wrong. Too sharp, too deliberate. The kind that gathers when people decide not to see something standing right in front of them. She was halfway through her coffee when Rook shifted. Not a lazy stretch, not the slow repositioning of an old working dog finding comfort. This was immediate, muscle memory, spine straight, ears forward. He rose and sat with the same precision he once had on hot tarmac under command. Myra's fingers tightened around the mug. Rook hadn't done that in years. The little girl stood there gripping a crutch like it was the only thing keeping her upright in a world that didn't want to make space. 8 years old, maybe. One real leg. One carbon fiber promise that never quite matched the rhythm of the other. Her hoodie hung heavy on her frame, sleeves swallowing her hands. She smelled faintly of cold air and old laundry soap. "May I sit here?" she asked. It wasn't the words that landed. It was how carefully she asked them, like she'd learned the cost of being heard. Myra opened her mouth, already nodding, already making room. And then Rook moved. He crossed the space between them without a sound and sat directly in front of the girl, chest high, tail barely moving. Not guarding, recognizing. Myra's pulse spiked. That posture meant something. She followed the line of his attention downward. The jeans, how they hung unevenly. The subtle outline of a prosthetic not designed for playgrounds or insurance forms. Military grade, purpose-built. The kind you don't get unless paperwork has blood on it somewhere. Her gaze lifted to the girl's hand. A keychain slipped free. Metal hit tile. The sound punched straight through Mara's chest. She knew that sound. Before the girl could bend, Mara was already moving, knees cracking, muscles remembering old priorities. She picked it up and the world narrowed to the weight in her palm. Eagle Globe Anchor. Outdated. Scarred. Paracord braided in a non-standard weave her former commanding officer used when he needed his hands busy to keep his mind steady. A scratch along the wing she remembered because she'd been there when it happened, swearing at a Humvee ignition under fire while he laughed and told her to breathe. Her lungs locked. Across the shop a man laughed, loud, careless. "Cute prop," he said. "People will try anything for sympathy these days." Mara didn't look at him. She looked at the girl. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. The child didn't hesitate. "It was my dad's." Something inside Mara broke open that she'd welded shut years ago. What was his name? The answer landed clean, certain. Rowan Price. The mug slipped from Mara's hand and shattered. No one moved. The room held its breath as if unsure whether this was drama or inconvenience. Mara stood slowly. The kind of slow that comes when rage is perfectly controlled. She rolled her sleeve up. The tattoo was old, scarred, black ink softened by time and fire, a rook chess piece, coordinates, a date. The girl gasped. She pulled her own sleeve back, revealing the same symbol drawn in marker, refreshed daily like a promise that refused to fade. The man scoffed again. "Enough with the theatrics." That's when Mara dropped to one knee. Her salute was crisp, unquestionable. "This," she said, voice steady, "is the daughter of my commanding officer." The silence shattered something in the room that could never be put back together. She didn't shout, she didn't embellish. She told the truth. About the building, the beam, the fire. About a man who stayed because leadership sometimes means knowing exactly what it will cost and paying it anyway. About a child who lost her leg waiting at a base gate because war doesn't ask permission before it takes. Phones lowered. Eyes dropped. One by one people stood not to applaud but to make space. Chairs moved, paths cleared. The girl sat, crutch across her lap. Rook laid his head gently on her knee. Myra stayed kneeling longer than protocol allowed. Because some salutes aren't about rank. They're about remembrance. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did Mara's hand start shaking only after the salute was over? She noticed it the moment she stood up, not during the confrontation, not while the room was still frozen in shame. Only afterward, when the adrenaline drained and left behind the quiet, exposed truth she'd been running from for years. Her fingers trembled as she pulled the chair out for the girl, as if her body had finally been given permission to remember. Alone sat carefully, adjusting her balance the way kids with prosthetics learn to do long before they learn multiplication. She didn't look around to see who was watching now. She kept her eyes on the table, on the grain of the wood, on the place where the shattered mug had left a dark stain. Like she didn't trust the room yet. Like she'd learned that kindness can evaporate the moment attention drifts. Rook stayed close, too close for coincidence. His head rested on her knee, his breathing slow but alert, the way it had been on Overwatch when everything looked calm but never really was. Mara watched him from the corner of her eye and felt the old ache return, the one she carried beneath medals and medical clearances and polite civilian conversations. She took the seat across from Alone, lowering herself carefully. Across the shop, people pretended to resume their mornings. Coffee cups lifted, screens unlocked, but nothing was the same. A fracture had run through the room, splitting comfort from conscience. Mara cleared her throat. "Do you want something to drink?" she asked. Alone shrugged. "Hot water is fine." That landed harder than any insult had. Mara stood again, ignoring the protest in her knees, and walked to the counter. The barista didn't ask what she wanted. He just nodded, eyes glassy, and handed her a mug already steaming. No charge, no receipt, an apology wrapped in porcelain. When Mara returned, she placed the mug gently in front of the girl. Alone whispered thank you so softly it barely made it to the table. They sat like that for a moment, the kind of pause that isn't empty, just careful. Mara broke it. "How long have you been carrying that keychain?" Alone's fingers closed around it instinctively. "Since before the hospital, before everything." Mara nodded. She didn't ask which hospital. There are too many answers to that question. "You know," Mara said, choosing her words the way she used to choose routes through unfamiliar streets, "your dad used to tell us that gear isn't just gear, that it remembers." Alone looked up for the first time. "Remembers what?" "Who held it," Mara said, "and why." Something shifted in the girl's eyes, not relief, recognition. Around them the shop slowly emptied. The man with the loud voice was gone, so were the whispers. What remained felt stripped down, honest, exposed in a way Mara recognized from the aftermath of missions, the quiet after action when no one is sure what comes next. Alone took a careful sip of the hot water, hands steady despite the steam. "They told me he died in an accident," she said suddenly. Mara's jaw tightened. "They said it was fast," Alone continued. "That he didn't feel anything, but Dad never liked lies, even small ones." Mara felt the old internal conflict rise, the one between duty and mercy, between telling the truth and protecting what little innocence war hadn't already stolen. "He stayed," Mara said finally, "when he didn't have to." Alone nodded once. "I know." That answer unraveled something inside Mara she hadn't realized was still holding. The memories came back the way they always did, without warning, without sequence. Dust-filled air, shouting over comms, the weight of her rifle digging into her shoulder as she tried to cover a hallway that refused to clear. Rowan Price standing in the middle of it all, calm in the way only leaders who accept outcomes can be calm. "Whitlock," he'd said, voice steady even as the building groaned. "You're taking point, that's an order." She argued. Of course she had, she always did. He'd smiled just a little. You're faster, and you've got more to come back to. She hated that he was right. Mara blinked hard and found herself back in the coffee shop, the hum of machines replacing the echo of collapsing concrete. I tried to find you, she said quietly. But everything was classified, names redacted, addresses buried. Elone traced the edge of her mug. We moved a lot. Mara understood that too. Grief makes homes temporary. A man approached hesitantly from a nearby table, older, gray at the temples. He didn't interrupt, just placed a folded napkin beside Alone's mug and nodded once before walking away. Inside was a simple note, "Thank you for your father." Alone stared at it, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket like it mattered. More people followed, not speeches, not praise, just small gestures, space being made. A chair adjusted, a door held open. Mara watched it happen and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, not pride, responsibility. Because this wasn't over. Outside, the late morning light shifted. Shadows moved across the sidewalk, stretching long and thin like reminders that time keeps going whether you're ready or not. Alone finished her drink. Do you still do missions? She asked. Mara hesitated, not like before. Because you're retired. Because I stayed, Mara said. The girl considered that. My dad stayed too. Yes, Mara said, he did. They sat with that shared truth between them, heavy but solid. When they finally stood to leave, Mara noticed how naturally Alone reached for Rook's collar, how the dog adjusted his pace without command. Like they'd done this before. Like muscle memory can cross generations. At the door, Alone paused. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you kneel? Mara thought of all the answers she could give. Rank, respect, protocol. I knelt, she said, because some people carry the cost of war long after the shooting stops, and they deserve to be met at eye level. Alone smiled, not big, not dramatic, just enough. Outside, the city noise rushed back in. Cars, voices, life continuing. Mara watched the girl walk away, each step measured, determined. Not broken, not fragile, just human. Rook looked back once, then followed. Mara stayed where she was for a moment longer, feeling the weight of unfinished promises settle on her shoulders again. She realized then that this meeting hadn't been an accident. It was a reminder. That truth has a way of resurfacing. That leadership doesn't end when the uniform comes off. And that sometimes redemption doesn't arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as a child asking for a place to sit. And being brave enough to say yes. Why did Mara follow them instead of walking away like she'd planned to? She told herself it was coincidence at first, that the timing lined up, that she just happened to be heading the same direction. But the truth pressed in with every step she took behind the small figure moving carefully down the sidewalk, one uneven rhythm echoing against concrete. Rook walked beside the girl like a shadow that refused to let go. Mara had survived enough after-action reports to recognize avoidance when she felt it. Leaving would have been easier, cleaner, a respectful exit after doing the right thing. But something in her chest wouldn't let the moment close. The story wasn't finished. Not yet. Alone stopped at the crosswalk, waiting for the signal. She didn't fidget, didn't rush. She stood the way someone stands when they've learned patience the hard way. Rook sat automatically, leash slack, eyes scanning with quiet discipline. Mara slowed her pace, keeping distance. That was when she saw it. Across the street, a group of teenagers leaned against a storefront window, loud, careless. One of them nudged another and nodded toward the girl's leg. A familiar look passed between them. Mara felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not again. Alone noticed too. Her shoulders tightened just a fraction, not fear, anticipation, like she'd already calculated the odds of what came next. The light changed. Alone stepped forward. One of the boys muttered something. Laughter followed. Myra moved before she thought. She crossed the street fast, boots hitting pavement harder than necessary, her presence cutting through the noise like a sudden weather shift. She didn't yell, didn't threaten. She just stopped beside Alone. The laughter died. Rook stood. The boys suddenly found the inside of the shop very interesting. Alone didn't look up. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Mara exhaled. I know. They walked together after that, not talking, just moving through the city like two people temporarily sharing the same burden. At the bus stop, Alone sat on the bench, placing her crutch carefully beside her. The bench was cold, metal, the kind designed for short waits and shorter patience. Mara stayed standing, old habit. This is me, Alone said. Mara nodded, then surprised herself. Where are you headed? Alone hesitated. Home. Another word that can mean everything or nothing. The bus pulled up with a sigh of brakes. Doors opened. People boarded without looking. Alone stood slowly, adjusting her balance. Rook shifted to give her room. Before she stepped on, she turned back. Will I see you again? The question landed soft, but it carried weight. Mara felt the old instinct to keep distance rise. Attachments complicate things. Attachments get people hurt. That's what she'd told herself for years. I'd like that, she said instead. Alone smiled. This time it reached her eyes. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Mara stood there longer than necessary, watching until it disappeared into traffic. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, the city lights flickering through blinds like distant signal fires. Rook lay nearby, restless. He paced once, twice, then stopped in front of her. She reached down, resting her forehead against his. I know, she whispered. The memories came back sharper this time. Not just the mission, the aftermath, the interviews, the official language that sanded truth down to something palatable. Accident, equipment failure, unavoidable loss. Rowan Price deserved better. So did his daughter. By morning, Mara had made a decision that scared her more than any deployment ever had. She pulled a worn folder from the back of her closet. No labels, no markings, the kind of thing you don't open unless you're ready to change something. Inside were notes, dates, names she'd memorized and tried to forget, communications she'd never sent, questions no one had wanted answered. She hadn't kept them to expose anything. She'd kept them because forgetting felt worse. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Staff Sergeant Whitlock, a woman's voice asked. Yes. This is Captain Elise Monroe, Office of Internal Review. Mara closed her eyes. Yes, ma'am. We received an inquiry connected to Captain Rowan Price, a minor beneficiary. Your name came up. Silence stretched. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Mara inhaled slowly. I've been waiting for that call. They met 3 days later in a government building that smelled like recycled air and old paper. The walls were bare, the questions precise. Mara answered carefully, truthfully. She didn't embellish, didn't accuse. She just told them what she'd seen. When she left, she didn't know if anything would change, but something inside her had shifted. The weight felt shared. That Saturday, she went back to the coffee shop. Same table. Same light. Alone arrived 10 minutes later, walking with more confidence this time. She waved when she saw Mara. Rook practically vibrated. They talked about small things, school, books, the way Alone liked science because it explained things without pretending. Do you miss him? Alone asked suddenly. Mara didn't ask who. Every day, she said. Alone nodded, me too. They sat in that shared absence, not trying to fill it. When it was time to leave, Alone hesitated. "Can I show you something?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A drawing, crude lines, a stick-figure man with a rook symbol on his chest, beside him a smaller figure with a crutch, and next to them a dog. At the bottom, written carefully, "We are still here." Mara swallowed hard. "Yes," she said, "you are." As they parted ways again, Mara understood something she'd avoided for years. Some missions don't end. They just change shape. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't to advance. It's to stay present long enough to make sure the truth doesn't disappear with the smoke. Why did the knock on Mara's door feel heavier than gunfire ever had? It came just after sunrise. 3 sharp knocks, controlled, professional, the kind that didn't ask if you were ready, it assumed you should be. Rook was on his feet instantly, low growl in his chest, not aggressive but alert. Mara swung her legs off the bed, heart already packing ahead of her thoughts. She hadn't slept much again. Decisions had a way of stealing rest long before consequences arrived. She opened the door. 2 uniforms, not combat, dress, clean lines, neutral faces. "Staff Sergeant Mara Whitlock," the woman asked. "Yes. We need to speak with you." Mara stepped aside without hesitation. You don't invite fear in. You acknowledge it and keep moving. They sat at her small kitchen table. The morning light was harsh, unkind. It showed everything: wrinkles, scars, the faint tremor in her hands when she poured coffee she didn't offer them. The man spoke first. "This isn't disciplinary." That didn't comfort her. "It's procedural," the woman added, "connected to Captain Rowan Price." There it was. The name still had weight, still bent the air around it. Mara nodded. "I figured." They asked about timelines, about decisions made under pressure, about things that never made it into reports because reports don't like ambiguity. Mara answered slowly, carefully. She didn't defend herself. She didn't accuse anyone else. She told the truth. When they left, they didn't promise outcomes. They never do. But as the door closed behind them, Mara realized something unsettling. She felt lighter. Not relieved, just unburdened. As if finally saying his name out loud in the right room had loosened a knot she'd been carrying since the fire. That afternoon, she went to the range. Not the public one. The old facility outside the city, half forgotten, where veterans went when they needed the echo of something familiar. She signed in, set up her lane, and breathed in the smell of oil and steel. The first shot went wide. She lowered the weapon, surprised. That never happened. Her hands were steady, her stance correct, but her focus fractured, pulled in too many directions at once. She lowered the rifle and leaned her forehead against the cool divider. "Get it together." She closed her eyes. Saw a coffee shop, a keychain, a girl's steady voice saying it belonged to my dad. Mara packed up early. Some days, strength looks like walking away before you break something that matters. Saturday came faster than she expected. She arrived at the coffee shop early this time. Same table, same quiet anticipation. Rook settled at her feet like he belonged there now. When Alone walked in, something had changed. Not her gait, not the leg. Her posture. She stood a little taller. Her eyes scanned the room, not defensively but curiously, like she expected to be seen. Mara felt an unexpected swell of pride. They talked about school, about a science project involving bridges and load-bearing structures. Alone explained it with careful enthusiasm, hands moving as she spoke. "My dad used to say bridges are promises," she said. "They say you'll make it to the other side." Mara swallowed. He was right. Halfway through their drinks, a woman approached the table, mid-30s, nervous smile, hands twisting together. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I just wanted to say I was here that day." Mara stiffened, old reflex. The woman looked at Alone. I didn't do anything, and I should have. Alone studied her for a moment, then nodded. Okay. The woman blinked, startled. Okay. Yes, Alone said simply. You said it now. The woman left with tears on her cheeks. Mara watched Alone with new eyes. That kind of grace doesn't come from nowhere. Later, as they stood to leave, a man near the door held it open too long, smiling awkwardly. Have a good day, he said, voice careful. Alone smiled back. You too. Outside, the sky threatened rain. They walked a block together before Alone stopped. Mara. Yes. Did my dad know he wasn't coming back? The question cut clean. Mara didn't answer right away. Yes, she said finally, but he also knew you were. Alone looked down at her prosthetic, then back up. Then I think he'd say it was worth it. Mara felt something crack in her chest. Your dad will be proud of you, she said. Alone shrugged. I'm proud of him. They parted again, but this time the goodbye felt different, less tentative, more certain. That night, Mara sat at her desk and opened the folder again. She didn't add to it. She organized it, put things in order, labeled what could be labeled, prepared it to be handed over if asked. She wasn't chasing justice. She was protecting truth. Weeks passed. The inquiry deepened, quietly, carefully. Mara was called in twice more. Each time the questions sharpened. Each time she answered. No headlines, no leaks. Just movement. Alone kept coming to the coffee shop, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit. One afternoon she asked, do soldiers ever get tired of being brave? Mara laughed softly, all the time. Then why do they keep doing it? Mara thought of Rowan, of the beam, of the fire. Because some things matter more than fear, she said. Alone nodded, as if filing that away for later. On a rainy Thursday, the letter arrived. Official seal, heavy paper. Mara didn't open it right away. She sat with it on the table, Rook's head resting against her leg. When she finally did, she read it once, then again. The language was careful, legal, but the meaning was clear. Captain Rowan Price's death classification was being amended. Not an accident. An act of valor. Mara closed her eyes. It wasn't justice, but it was truth stepping into the light. That Saturday, she brought the letter with her. She didn't hand it over immediately. They talked first, about school, about dogs, about nothing important. When she finally slid it across the table, Alone didn't open it. She just looked at Mara. Is it good? Yes, Mara said, it's honest. Alone nodded, then opened it slowly. She read every word. When she finished, she didn't cry. She folded the letter and placed it beside the keychain. Thank you, she said. Mara shook her head. I didn't do this alone. Alone smiled. You stayed. That night, Mara realized something she hadn't expected. Redemption doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in quiet confirmations. In truths corrected. In children who no longer have to doubt what their parents died for. And sometimes, healing isn't about forgetting the fire. It's about finally understanding why someone was willing to stand in it. Why did Mara feel uneasy the moment the room started applauding? It happened without warning, a ripple of sound that grew into something louder, fuller, people standing, hands coming together, faces turned toward the small table by the window where a little girl with a crutch sat beside a retired military dog and a woman who looked like she still carried dust in her lungs. Mara stiffened. Applause had never meant safety to her. It meant attention, exposure, the kind of attention that simplified stories until they were no longer true. Alone noticed it too. Her shoulders tightened, just a fraction, enough that Mara caught it. The barista had posted the plaque the night before, small, polished, mounted near the entrance where people would see it without having to stop. It read simply, "This table always has room. In memory of Captain Rowan Price." Someone must have read it out loud. Someone else must have connected the dots. Now the room was clapping like it had completed something. Myra leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You okay?" Alone nodded, but she didn't look convinced. "I do like when they stare." "I know," Myra said. The clapping faded awkwardly as people realized they weren't being acknowledged. Chairs scraped. Conversations restarted, forced and uneven, normality trying to stitch itself back together. Mara exhaled slowly. "That," she said, "is why I prefer quiet respect." Elone smiled a little. "Me too." They stayed a while longer, then left early. Outside the air felt cooler, honest. They walked without speaking for a block, then another. "Mara," Elone said. "Yes." "Are they going to make my dad famous?" The question caught her off guard. "No," Mara said carefully. "They're just going to tell the truth." Elone considered that. "I think he'd like that better." So did Mara. But truth has consequences. She felt them 3 days later when a black SUV waited outside her building. No sirens, no spectacle, just inevitability. The meeting took place in a quiet office with frosted glass and no decorations. 3 people this time, all calm, all prepared. They thanked her for her cooperation. Then they asked if she would be willing to testify if it went further. Mara didn't answer right away. Testifying meant reopening everything. The mission, the fire, the moment she'd obeyed an order she still dreamed about. It also meant protection, for Elone, for the truth. "Yes," she said. They nodded, as if they'd expected nothing else. That night Mara sat on her floor with her back against the couch, Rook curled beside her. She ran her fingers through his fur, grounding herself. "You stayed too," she murmured. Rook huffed softly. The next Saturday, Elone didn't show up. Mara checked the clock, waited 10 minutes, then 20. Her chest tightened. She told herself not to spiral. People have lives, things happen. But instinct doesn't listen to logic. She texted the number Elone had carefully typed into her phone weeks earlier. No response. Another 10 minutes passed. Mara stood. Rook was already up. They didn't make it to the door before Elone appeared, breathless, cheeks flushed, hair windblown. "Sorry," she said quickly. "The bus was late." Mara didn't scold, she didn't lecture. She just exhaled. "Sit," she said gently. Elone did. They talked about nothing important for a while. Then Elone reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. "They sent this to our house," she said, "from the base." Mara recognized the envelope before she opened it. Inside was an invitation. A memorial official, formal speeches, flags. Elone watched her closely. "Do I have to go?" Mara met her gaze. "No." Relief flickered across the girl's face. But Mara added, "You might want to, on your terms." Elone looked down at her prosthetic. "They'll look at this." "Yes," Mara said, "some will. And think I'm sad." "Yes." Elone was quiet for a long time. "Can you come with me?" she asked. Mara didn't hesitate. "Yes." The memorial took place under a wide sky. Clean uniforms, polished shoes, carefully arranged grief. Mara stood beside Elone, not in front, not behind. When the speeches started, Mara watched Elone more than the podium, watched her jaw tighten at certain words, watched her relax at others. When Rowan Price's name was read, Elone didn't cry. She stood straighter. Afterward, a woman approached them, older, worn around the eyes. "My husband served with your father," she told Elone. "He spoke of him often." Elone nodded. "He talked about his team too." The woman smiled through tears. He loved you very much. I know, Alone said. Later, as they walked away, Alone asked, why do grown-ups say, I'm sorry for your loss, when they don't know what they're sorry for? Mara thought about it. Because they don't have better words. Maybe they should just say thank you, Alone said. Mara smiled. Maybe they should. Weeks turned into months. The story faded from public attention as stories do. The plaque remained. The table stayed open. Alone grew, not taller yet but steadier, more certain. Mara noticed the changes in herself too. She laughed more, slept better. The folder stayed closed most nights. One afternoon, Alone asked, do you think my dad would have liked me? Mara stopped walking. He would have adored you, she said. Alone nodded. Good. They reached the coffee shop. Same table, same light. Rook settled. A new customer hesitated nearby, scanning for a seat. Alone looked up before Mara could. You can sit here, she said. The woman blinked. Are you sure? Alone smiled. This table always has room. Mara felt her throat tighten. She understood then that something had shifted, not just for Alone but for her. This wasn't about closure. It was about continuation. About carrying forward what mattered without needing to announce it. Sometimes legacy isn't a name on a plaque. Sometimes it's a child who knows her worth. A soldier who learns to stay. And a quiet corner of the world where dignity is offered freely. No questions asked. Why did Mara hesitate at the doorway when everything finally felt calm? It wasn't fear, not the kind she recognized from nights that smelled like smoke and metal. This was quieter, a reluctance to step forward when stillness had become familiar. Peace can feel suspicious to people who earned their breathing the hard way. The coffee shop was almost empty that morning. Early light spilled across the floor, soft and forgiving. The plaque by the door caught it just right, the letters faintly glowing like they'd learned to wait for attention instead of demanding it. Alone was already there. She sat at the table, backpack tucked neatly under the chair, crutch leaned with careful intention against the wall. Rook lay beside her, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert in the way only working dogs ever truly are. Mara watched for a second before approaching. Alone wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't scanning the room. She was reading. That alone felt like a victory. Mara took the seat across from her. What's the book? Alone closed it gently, thumb marking the page. It's about constellations. Stars. And how people used them to find their way home, Alone said. Before maps. Mara nodded. Still do in some places. Alone smiled. I like that they're always there, even when you can't see them. Something in Mara's chest loosened. They ordered their drinks. This time, Alone asked for hot chocolate without lowering her voice. The barista smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. They sat quietly for a while. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't guarded anymore. It was shared. Mara, Alone said eventually. Yes. What happens now? Mara thought about the question, about how many times she'd asked it herself, staring at ceilings in unfamiliar rooms, wondering which version of herself would wake up next. Now, she said slowly, you keep growing. Alone considered that, and you. Mara smiled, I learn how to stay. That answer surprised them both. Outside, a light rain began to fall, not enough to disrupt, just enough to be noticed. Alone watched it through the window. I used to think rain was sad. And now I think it's just honest. Mara laughed softly. Your dad would have liked that. Alone didn't answer right away. Then she said, I think he already does. They finished their drinks, packed up their things. At the door, Alone paused and reached into her backpack. She pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of paper and handed it to Mara. What's this? I wrote something, Alone said, for my dad, but I think it's also for you. Mara hesitated before opening it. Inside, the handwriting was uneven but deliberate. Dear Dad, they see me now, not because I'm broken but because I stayed. Mara says staying is brave too. I believe her. Mara's vision blurred. Thank you, she said quietly. Alone shrugged. You helped me find the words. They stepped outside together. The rain cooled the air, dampened the noise of the city into something manageable. At the bus stop, they stood side by side. Will you still come on Saturdays? Alone asked. Yes, Mara said, as long as you want me there. Alone nodded. I do. The bus arrived, doors opened, people moved. Alone stepped up, then turned back once more. Mara. Yes. You didn't save me, Alone said gently. You just saw me. Mara felt the truth of it settle deep. The bus pulled away. Mara walked home slowly. Rook matched her pace, leash loose, steps easy. For the first time in a long while, the city didn't feel like something she had to navigate defensively. It felt inhabited. That night, Mara sat at her desk and opened the folder one last time. She didn't add anything. She closed it. Some truths don't need guarding forever. Some missions end not with resolution, but with release. Weeks later, Mara stood in front of a classroom, not in uniform, no slides, no grand story. Just a room full of teenagers who'd asked to hear about leadership. She didn't talk about combat. She talked about responsibility, about choosing to see what's easier to ignore, about the quiet moments where character reveals itself without witnesses. Afterward, a girl with a brace on her leg waited until everyone else left. Do you think, she asked, that people like us can be strong without proving it all the time? Mara smiled. I know we can. On Saturday, the coffee shop was full again. Laughter, conversations, life pressing in from all sides. At the table by the window, Alone sat with her book open, Rook's paw resting gently over her hand. The ritual hadn't changed. It didn't need to. A man approached, scanning the room. Is this seat taken? Alone looked up. No, she said, you can sit. The man hesitated, then smiled and thanked her. Mara watched from across the table, something warm spreading through her chest. She finally understood what Rowan Price had meant all those years ago, standing calm in impossible places. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about who you make space for when no one is watching. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. Sometimes it doesn't demand or defend. Sometimes it simply sits down, holds out a hand, and reminds the world, quietly, steadily, that everyone deserves a place at the table.